Monomers are single units, mono, like a monocle, one eyeglass lens. They are a single unit that could be bonded and bonded and bonded and strung together to form something much bigger, the polymer. And if you have a big enough polymer or multiple polymers coming together, then you have a macromolecule. Monomers are kind of like train cars. They're repeating units. Your train car could be 100 cars long. Each car is a monomer, but the overall train is your polymer. And that train plus track plus stations, that's part of that macromolecule. Whether it's protein or carbs, they're all built the same way through covalent bond. Each one is contributing at least one and holding on to the other person's one. How they form these bonds is through dehydration. They remove water, an H and OH from the molecule, which causes these open electrons to bind each other to rebuild that stability. When you dissolve things in water, sometimes they don't break down further. Like we know if you put salt in water, it's going to eventually go clear. You'll eventually see all those crystals disappear. Same as sugar. They do not contain functional groups. But sometimes it doesn't go into solution. It settles on the ground as a solid. There's a precipitate. Those are functional groups. So functional groups, I've got one in yellow, one in green, are reactive compounds that might be associated to larger molecules, but they themselves cannot be broken down. Carbohydrates is our polymer form, and when it's digested down in us or broken down, we get sugar, the most common of which is C6H12O6, and that's glucose. Sugar's significance is it's our primary source of energy. There's a lot of bonds in there, and when we break bonds, we release energy. You get a lot of bang for your buck. Okay. Some sugars are simple sugars. They exist as their ring only. Some sugars are disaccharides. They're two sugars bonded together through dehydration synthesis. You can have oligosaccharides if you've got like 20 of them, and a polysaccharide, which is basically the complex carb, if you've got thousands. Those polysaccharides, we know them by common names like starch, glycogen, and cellulose. So the difference between complex carbs and simple carbs mostly has to do with their processing, what we're stripping away to preserve them, but primarily our ability to digest it, our ability to get to the base raw monomer materials. The complex carbs digest slowly, so they're much more filling. They're going to carry you longer. You're less likely to binge eat them. Okay. They also have higher fiber, which we do not digest, so it passes through us. But fiber is very important for a couple of reasons. One, it retains water. We need water. And two, the microbes that exist in our gut that help us do this digestion, they eat fiber. They rely upon a high fiber diet. And so those complex carbs are very useful. It's feeding things that do feed us. And so that's important. I started with carbs because out of all the things we eat, this is the bulk of it. It's somewhere around half of our caloric intake every day. And half of that half is just straight up sugar, added sugar. A lot of these foods already have sugar associated with them in building them. And yet we add additional sugars to make it sweeter, right? I mean, sometimes we add sugars to things that don't make logical sense, but we'll swear by it. Okay, like spaghetti sauce should totally have sugar in it. But at the same time, you're like, it's spaghetti sauce, it's savory. Does it need sugar in it? But if you look, it does. It does a lot, right? Fruit juices, we add sugar to fruit juices. It's fruit. It's already got fructose. It's already sweet. And when we look at the day-to-day impact of our reliance on carbs, if we don't eat enough carbs, we've got low body weight. And that can be problematic. Not only can it lead to malnutrition, but if you don't have enough like body fat on you, this is especially true for girls, you're not going to go through puberty at the right time. Trend to cut it hard. That's our energy intake. So they're tired, they're listless, they're not doing so good. And then the body has to burn something else, muscle, to the point where there are no reserves of energy left behind. But you can go extreme here too and indulge in all the carbs. Dental caries is the scientific term for plaque. Basically, when you go for your dental cleaning and they pull off that plaque, bacteria that have coated your teeth, and they create waste products. Too much carbs leads to increased dental caries. That sugar leads to cavities thing, that's real. And the reason for that is we're feeding bacteria. They love sugar. And so if you eat a lot of sugar, they're super, super happy. And then that can also lead to weight gain, gastric ulcers. Lipids are the polymer. The monomers are glycerol and fatty acids. Why do we care about fats? Oh, they serve so many roles in our bodies. The primary one is energy, long-term energy storage. Those fatty acids and lipids build each cell's membrane, this interface with the outside world. They also serve as hormones and chemical signals in our bodies, transmitting information. So they're really, really important. Again, we see this good fat, bad fat difference. Well, it has to do with how they're built. Form dictates function. So saturated versus unsaturated fats. So saturated fats get their name because they are saturated with hydrogen, meaning fatty acid tail is only bonded to hydrogen, which makes it very, very uniform. And if you're very, very uniform, then you can stack very, very nicely. And when something stacks really, really nicely, it becomes harder to attach to and digest, to find a hole. So our saturated fats take us longer to digest. How do you recognize a saturated fatty acid? They are solid at room temperature. Okay, that's how hard they are to break down, that your butter can just exist still in its cube form despite the temperature of the room. The unsaturated fatty acids, they're bonded to something else, and that becomes a much bigger molecule. So they have double bonds. So when things bond there, it creates these little kinks in the tail. Now we've got these gaps. Now we've got these handholds for an enzyme to come in and break it down. So these healthy fats are the ones that are liquid at room temperature. So fish oils, olive oils, those count there. Big functions of lipids, energy. 1 gram of fat stores twice as many energy molecules as your sugar. Also insulation. Okay, we rely upon our fat to keep us warm. We need fat because the fat insulates us from the cold. Think about, where do we accumulate fat first? It tends to be right around our stomach area, right? And that's where we've got our gastrointestinal tract, which is absorbing our nutrients. We're protecting a lot. Remember that the fats build our plasma membranes. This is something that every single cell needs. So as a result, 35% of our diet should be fat. A third of what you're eating should have fat, because if we don't have fat, we're going to have a weaker immune system. We will have vitamin deficiencies. We need the fats to help us move these insoluble vitamins into our body. But as always, if you eat too much, we've got problems. So it can lead to obesity. And fats often go hand in hand with cholesterol, which is one of those steroid molecules. We like cholesterol, generally speaking, because 50% of your plasma membrane is made up of cholesterol. It's meant to keep it fluid, basically force there to be these pockets or kinks in your plasma membranes. But if you have too much cholesterol, those old, hey, you've got high cholesterol. What does that mean? Well, that means that they're accumulating in your bloodstream and not being recycled readily. The monomer for proteins are amino acids. There are 23 naturally occurring amino acids. Why do we need proteins? Why are we eating these? Well, because they provide our structural support. Look at our musculature. That holds our bones together. It also enables us to move. So there's contractile motion here. In a pinch, we can break those proteins down for energy. So it's also storage. And those amino acids fold up to become enzymes and transport molecules that can shuttle some nutrients around in our bodies and in our cells. The primary structure of a protein is literally the sequence of amino acids. What's amino acid 1, 2, 3, 4 in the line? The secondary structure is your two-dimensional structure. Once you have those amino acids in a line, they're going to coil or fold depending upon their charges, depending upon the functional groups associated with them. Are they polar or non-polar, positive or negative? Those features are going to have an impact. And so there are two types of structures that you could have in the two-dimensional form. The first is an alpha helix, which spins like a pigtail, very curlicue. The second one is the beta pleated sheets. And so those ones are like bands. Tertiary is easy to remember. That's the 3 for 3D. Now that you've got these pleated sheets and you've got this helix, how do those two forms come together to actually give us a three-dimensional structure? And then 4 is when 2 or more of these tertiary proteins come together to actually do something. So here we've got our sequence of amino acids, our alpha helix, our beta sheet going forward and back. Those are, we see our beta sheets on the inside, our alpha helixes on the outside are now a three-dimensional structure. And then this red is this one right here, which came together with 3 others to create a red blood cell, 10 to maybe 30%. So less than a third of what we're eating should be protein. Now you have to adjust for this because if you're working out and you're trying to bulk up, you've joined CrossFit, then you need to up your protein. Right? So there's some give and take depending upon your goals. Too little protein will lead to decreased muscle mass, also decreased strength and balance, right? Because the proteins, our muscles are what's holding us together. It becomes a cascade, okay? Over time, a lack of protein can lose muscle mass. Well, if you've got less muscle, that cuts your strength. And if you're not really strong, well, that makes it harder for you to keep your balance. And if you're not really keeping your balance, that's going to slow your metabolism down because you're not doing things. But if you ate too much proteins, you could, again, gain weight, and this could lead to obesity. Nucleic acids. The monomer are nucleotides. Nucleotides come in different forms. There are purines, which are double ringed. Okay, that's our adenine and guanine. And then there are pyrimidines that are single ringed. Know the function of our nucleic acids. It's to carry genetic instructions. Okay, this is our blueprint for not only how to build us, but what we do, how we're going to grow, how we work, what are the checks and balances and regulation along the way. My diagram here is showing the similarities across some of the bigger organisms or more common things in our life. Human to human, you are about 99% identical to the person next, 99.9% identical to the person next to you. It takes 99% of you to code for a eukaryotic organism, to code for just the base blueprint of human. Now that 0.1% that's different is still a million base pairs. So you're still very unique, but the bulk of us is the same. And then we can look at that compared to like a mouse. 84% of our genetic code is exactly the same as a mouse's. Well, because there's a lot of overlap. We're both mammals. We're both eukaryotes. We're both omnivores. We both have hearts and spleens and kidneys, and they do those same roles, right? So 84% is just like standard higher organism code. And then there's another 8% that's very, very similar. We have genetic similarity, okay? Similarity, not exact matches, but genetic similarity of 97% to a banana, because they too are eukaryotic organisms, and there's a lot of similarity and overlap. So how do you get these nucleotides? You actually need about 4 grams of them a day, and we get them from anything we eat. So basically we are in excess. We constantly get nucleotides, right? Because you're eating carrots. Well, there's a code for how to build a carrot. You're eating eggs this morning in a delicious breakfast burrito with guacamole and some salsa. All those things were living organisms. They all had a genetic code at some point. You are getting nucleotides, and we are shedding them too in skin cells and whatnot. It is impossible to survive without nucleotides, just like it would be impossible to survive if you just stopped eating, period. But you can have too much nucleotides. That could be a negative. It is a relatively recent hypothesis that most of our age-related disorders like dementia, Alzheimer's, or just getting old in general, like our wrinkles, the loss of elasticity, it's a new hypothesis that maybe that is based upon a timer and the accumulation of all this excessive nucleotide that our bodies can't utilize. And if we see it that way, aging could be seen as an illness that could be treated or cured. And there's a small branch of scientists looking at that, looking to see if you could stop aging. You could still die. You're not immortal. So if you got sick or hit by a car, you could die, but you wouldn't age. Your skin would stay supple. You wouldn't have wrinkles. Too much nucleotides can also lead to autoimmune disorders. Our bodies don't know what to do with this excess and they attack it. And sometimes if they're accumulating in parts of your body, they're then attacking your thyroid, your spleen, and that can be problematic.